right, welcome back to All Talk. Kevin Dietz here with Matt Shepard on this Monday morning. The Michigan lawmakers were working hard over the weekend. They are running out of time. They may adjourn next week due to the possibility of losing their House majority. This adjournment is related to the Democratic National Committee's plan to move up Michigan's presidential primary. Because they may cut their session short, they are trying to get an awful lot of things passed. It's something we haven't seen in quite some while. Joining us now is David Dulio, political science professor at Oakland University. Good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I don't know that a lot of people are paying attention to what's going on in Lansing right now. Why is it that they have to end this session early? Let's start with that. Can you explain how this presidential primary situation works?
Sure. So earlier in the year, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law a measure that sets the date for the presidential primary in Michigan to be February 27th. Well, laws in Michigan only go into effect 90 days after the previous legislative session, so the one we're in now, 90 days after that ends. So if the legislature were to finish in the sort of normal time frame in December, that would not allow for that 90-day period to expire. So if they end early, like next week, they've got those 90 days, and that law can go into effect, and Michigan can have its primary on February 27th. That didn't appear to be such a big deal for Democrats, anyway, when it was being passed into law. But now, even just over the weekend, right, with the polling numbers that have come out for President Biden losing to Donald Trump in 5 of 6 key swing states, you've got maybe more and more Democrats saying, hey, maybe we ought to have some competition here in the primary.
How can they adjourn for a year when it's only November 6th?
Well, Matt, good question. They're the legislature. They're in charge. They can do whatever they want, right? I mean, it's Michigan has a quote-unquote full-time legislature, but others across the country have part-time legislatures, and they actually only meet sometimes for a couple of weeks or a month.
So you think that citizens would be outraged by all of this, but there hasn't been that much pushback, surprisingly. Democrats have a 2-seat majority in the House, and 2 members are running for mayoral positions that could jeopardize the majority. Are we seeing a big push for Democrats to get their legislative ideas pushed through before all of this goes down?
Well, I think that is another pressure point, right? I mean, if the 2 state representatives who are running for mayor, I believe in Warren and Westland, if they win those races tomorrow, at some point they would have to give up their state house seat. And that would only happen after they assume office, which is not immediate after Election Day. So there would be a little bit of flex time, but you also might even see some calls for them if they win tomorrow to resign those seats right away so that they can get on to transitioning into those mayoral roles. So I think there is some time pressure, and from the Democratic perspective, why not? They've got the votes. They have this whole year really pushed through all of their legislative priorities without losing Democratic votes on the floor.
David Dulio, the political science professor at Oakland University, joining us here on WJR. Why is it so important, do you think, that Michigan moves the presidential primary to February 27th in the state?
Well, number one, that is part of the Democratic National Committee's structure, right? The Michigan was handpicked by national Democrats to go in the early window, along with some other states like South Carolina, Nevada, and Georgia. But also, I mean, from a larger perspective, going early in the presidential primary process gives states, and Michigan this moving forward, gives states a really large influence on on who the eventual nominee is going to be. So going early is really important for states if they want to have some relevance in that primary process.
So by moving up, Michigan is in place. So that means all the candidates have to come here. They have to be seen in Michigan because it's early. They have to talk about the issues that are important to us. They can't just skip over us, basically. Does that actually help our state, or does that just help the parties pick who's going to be the candidate?
I think it's both, Kevin. I think it does matter because, when those candidates come here and they campaign here and they talk about issues that are important in Michigan, they talk to voters in Michigan, right? They're hearing about the issues that are at the top of mind for folks in our state. Where, if it's a state that goes later in the process, and I'm not sure where they fall, but let's just pick North Carolina, right? They're not hearing from and addressing issues important in, say, North Carolina, but they are here in Michigan. So, and another big factor is when there's a contested primary, it's all about the delegates. It's all about the delegates to the national convention. And there's a point at which in a presidential primary, states run the risk of going after the nominee has secured enough delegates to win. So you run the risk of going late and being totally irrelevant.
How should voters look at how the House and Senate combined to pass 90 bills over a 3-day span this past week? How should voters view that, where it seems like when they have to, they can seem to get the job done and pass bills in an appropriate manner, and yet there are other times where it seems like it's constantly stalemated? How should voters view that?
Well, I think that's another great point, right? Government can move fast when it wants to.
Right.
And it just seems like most of the time it doesn't want to. And, there are all sorts of instances and examples that we could point to where bills are passed very, very quickly, outside of what's somebody in the legislature might call regular order, where it goes through the process of a lengthy consideration period, if you will. I think it's always good to have some skepticism about, what our representatives are doing. I think everybody should look at things with a critical eye and ask themselves, what's really happening here? Are these folks working in my best interest or the best interest of my community, my state? And not just trust the information that comes out during the campaign period.
People are worried about education, gun reform, election intimidation, AI disclosure, all kinds of things. How good is it for the people if they're passing 90 bills in a 3-day span?
Well, again, I think there's a small caveat that we should put on that, right? None of this is a surprise. The Democrat majority has been very clear and it had for over a year about what they were going to do if they had a majority, and they have done it, right? They have delivered on what they said they were going to do during the campaign. Whether or not that matches up with the most important priorities of most people in Michigan is another story, right? I think you could absolutely point at some things that have been pushed through that are linked to certain constituencies in the Democratic winning coalition of voters, right? Union-friendly legislation is probably at the top of that list. And I think that, nothing surprises me in terms of what they have pushed through already or what is planned to go through maybe in the next week or so.
Appreciate it, David Dulio. You're listening to All Talk on WJ.